people's perception of a river and flooding pattern are very different from the states. They are more rooted to the ecological perception of the role of a river and role of flooding. But there are aspects to the administrative apparatus and controlling damage where it becomes a problematic, not in the flooding per se. In spite of the stated purpose of Cotton that he built the Anicut to control floods and famine, one can see from official records that the floods were never controlled. In fact, after the Anicut was built, several floods happened of bigger proportions than before, and what is worse, left a greater trail of inundation than earlier when there was no Anicut, mainly due to the politics of management and the irrigation system. The Anicut was completed in 1852-53, but there are floods recorded in 1864, 1876, 1884, 1896, and it goes on, and 1970s, 1986, 2006, 2009. So the Gazetteer in 1915 notes, and I quote, "In 1886, 1892 and 1900, the embankments breached and serious inundations were caused. Most of them have been raised since 1900. Drainage, though not so burning in question as in the Tanjore Delta, is a matter of great difficulty near the coast where the fall of the land is very gradual. Large tracts there are liable to be flooded by a heavy northeast monsoon," unquote. In Arthur Cotton's language, I quote, "The river must be restrained from wandering, which from its having no hard strata in its course, it always does naturally, and all its branches must be provided with artificial embankments to prevent the country being flooded from the river. And it is necessary by artificial means to keep the water constantly at a level which shall command the country, and also by a multitude of channels to lead it to every acre of land," unquote. And then he again says, quote, "The system of works now in progress in the delta of Godavari therefore are intended to embrace 4 objects, namely, to restrain the river, to preserve the land from floods, to supply it constantly with water, and pervade the tract thoroughly with means of very cheap transit." And you must note the, unquote, you note the term constantly with water. Then he connects the land revenue with irrigation works to say that this was not merely built to control the floods and famine as even present day engineers in Andhra Pradesh think Cotton had done. In fact, they deify Cotton. You can see Arthur Cotton's statues all over the Delta region. He in fact connects it to the financial part of the question. He quotes, I quote, "With regard to the financial part of the question, if the district is benefited to the extent, there can be no difficulty in arranging the land tax so that a certain portion of this profit shall be received into the treasury," unquote. That is, there was always a commodity angle and the revenue angle to the idea of irrigation works. It was not necessarily meant to control floods and famine. And finally, this whole thing of Christian governance, the Christian ethic that I was talking about. I quote, "In Rajahmundry, they have now learned that Englishmen have some ideas beyond collecting revenue. They can perfectly understand the wisdom and benevolence of government in executing such works as these, and the difference between a government that merely compels them to pay revenue and one that enables them to do it. The emphasis of all this is to give them entirely new ideas of what a Christian government is, and thus to prepare them to receive Christianity," unquote. So meanwhile, the idea of river linking doesn't, I'm coming to this because there is a connection to the colonial period in this as well. The idea of river linking does not take into consideration the principle of flooding rivers or seasonal flooding patterns, which could be irreversibly damaging ecologically. The idea itself has root in colonial times. It has very little or nothing to do with resolving the question of drought in one part and floods in another. The idea that Cotton and others in the British administration had was linked to exploiting the river as a roadway for goods. I quote, "The project of opening up navigation of Upper Godavari was first urged on the attention of government in 1851. A vast amount of money was expended on it, but eventually pronounced too expensive to be remunerative and was abandoned. Sir Arthur Cotton, a vigorous advocate and promoter of water carriage, was first to broach the subject," unquote. And he was thinking of a grand idea of, connecting water and steam navigation all the way from sea to Berar, all the way. So these are the colonial antecedents to the idea of a river and what it was meant for. So the idea that a river is alive and a live system is basically possible when you look at a river as enveloping diversity, diverse cultures, communities, biodiversity in ecological terms. Two authors that I recently read have this to say, that I quote, "The Godavari represents the secular face of India," unquote. Though I may not agree with their term secular, but why they say so is that in a book called Rivers of India, Sunil with Vaidyanathan and Shayani Mitra are saying that they are looking at the association of Godavari from its travels across, from Maharashtra down to the sea, and associated with different religions and diverse sects such as Brahmanical, Sikh and Jaina religions. But I look at another aspect to it. That consists in its travels across cultures and touching lives of communities. So there is a mainstream Telugu Godavari, a Marathwada Godavari, that is this farmers from Marathwada coming to Adilabad to pay obeisance to the river. These are all small farmers and landless people as well. There is a Koya Kondareddy Godavari of the tribal communities, a Palli Vadabalji Godavari of the fishermen communities. It touches diverse landscapes and terrains, plains, hills, forest, green fields, and made rich with the alluvium on the Lanka lands. Lanka is a very specific Telugu context term for alluvial islands that are formed post Godavari coming. So each of these communities make their own sense of the river, and she means differently to all of them. The fishermen have long chalked out their life's roads on Godavari's flow. Their personal histories are the history of a river route, written on the river, literally. If you remove the river from their lives, half their histories have disappeared. For instance, in the 3 districts of the submergent zone of Andhra Pradesh under Polavaram Dam, the fishermen from caste subgroups such as Vadabalji, Palli, Jalar and so on, each have their fishing zones they seldom bypass. They stay on the banks of Godavari for 6 to 9 months of a year and go back home to the villages they came from. Each settlement has its own original home and a second home on the banks of the river. The original home and the second home do not change for many years until a radical among them chalks out a new route on the river to settle on a new river bank. And as Muthu Ramarao, the one you had seen, had done. And in the process, interestingly, he became an outsider to his community back in Rajahmundry. And I knew this because this was when I met him in 2004, I went back in 2010 trying to retrace my steps to Muthu Ramarao to see him. And I realized that the people there are saying he's not one among us because he took the different route. He went upstream, a route that no other fisherman in their community had ever done before. So my respect for Muthu Ramarao increased immensely after that, to just think of the idea that a man suddenly decides and I will take a different route in life. So the Kapileshwarapuram fishermen, this is a village near Rajahmundry, go fishing for 9 months in a year to Kondamadulu, Pochavaram, Kolluru. These are all in East, West Godavari and Khammam districts. Their fishing zones are not district bound or region bound, but are created from life cycles of fish and the journey of the fish in the river. Then there will be fishermen from Yanam settled in Manturu in East Godavari. The state does not understand these kind of movements. Funnily, the fishery departments told me that it is difficult to enumerate them since they are itinerant. But it takes just an observation for 2 years to know this pattern. And funnier still is the fact that they are out there making a list of tribal fishermen for the R&R package of the Polavaram Dam. They are forming fishermen's cooperatives in their books comprising of Girijan fishermen from all these villages, which actually have traditional fishermen in these villages since years now. And the officials tell me that there are no traditional fishermen in these areas, that the ITDA has trained the Girijans to fish. And I know I'm digressing a bit, but let me add one point to this before I retrace myself. It is true that there are few Kondareddis who actually fish in Godavari waters, very few, with boat and net and all that. But these have learned the trade from these very traditional fishermen in Mantur. I saw this, and they share a unique bond. On the other hand, Not many would even think that communities such as Godavari's fishermen are taxpayers. The middle classes in the cities go on raving and ranting about being taxpayers. The fishermen pay an annual pannu, that is a tax, to get license to be allowed to fish in the river. So unless you observe and make note of the movement of fishermen, you lose out on their basic historical location, which is not rooted on land, but thriving on river and its movement, as with the movement of the fish. And any change in that larger pattern means a change not only in pattern of birth of fish and movement of species and connecting links with other species, but also a drastic reconfiguring of a community's history and memory. Since they are marginalized, it does not seem to be important for the state to even consider their histories or memory as of any consequence to the nation, built only by and around a few major moneyed industrialists. The movement of a river and non-movement in all these grandiose plans of storing rivers, linking rivers, is controlled by the history of just a few of these moneyed parties in our country. Nobody moves policy as much as these top few do, it seems. Back to where I started this line of argument. What I'm trying to say is that there are aspects that make a river a live, living river. Its dynamic relationship and its relational aspects to a community and cultures with histories.